It started with a whisper. Father Elias had been the priest at St. Augustine's for over 20 years. Nestled deep in the sleepy hills of New Hampshire, the church was old, small, and unremarkable. Its wooden pews creaked with age, the stained glass windows filtered in cold blue light, and the smell of wax and incense lingered in the air like a ghost. The parishioners were few but faithful. Nothing strange had ever happened there until the confession started. It was a Monday evening when Elias first noticed it. The church had long emptied after evening mass, and he was preparing to lock up. That's when the red light above the confessional booth flickered on. He hesitated. It wasn't unheard of for someone to come in late, needing privacy, but it was unusual. He took a breath, entered the booth, and slid open the small screen. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," came a deep, gravelly voice. Elias nodded. "How long has it been since your last confession, my son?" A pause. "I don't remember." That set something in Elias on edge, but he said nothing. "I've done terrible things. I hurt people. I killed them, Father." The details that followed were horrifying. Specific names, places, even dates. The confessor described each murder with cold precision. Elias listened in stunned silence. He had heard many confessions in his time, but nothing like this. When it ended, the man simply said, "There will be more." Elias flung the door open and rushed out, but the other booth was empty. No door creak, no footsteps, nothing. Just the flickering candlelight and his pounding heart. The next night, it happened again. Same voice, more confessions, more deaths. By the third night, Elias contacted the police. He didn't reveal the source. He couldn't by the sacred seal of confession, but he gave them enough vague details that an officer agreed to investigate. Then Elias checked the church's security footage. There was no one entering the booth. No one entering the church at all. He replayed the footage again and again. Nothing. The confessor was speaking from a booth that sat empty. Disturbed but determined, Elias began to investigate the names and details given in the confessions. He stayed up late in the rectory, searching through old newspapers, death records, archives. To his horror, the stories were real. But the murders hadn't happened recently. They were cold cases, some dating back to the 1950s, all unsolved. One name came up repeatedly: Raymond M. Greeley, a drifter. Suspected in several killings. Arrested once, but released due to lack of evidence. Executed in 1963 for a murder he never confessed to. The last article Elias found showed a photo of Greeley outside a courthouse, eyes shadowed, expression blank. It was the same voice. Elias was sure of it. The next week, Elias prepared differently. He arrived early, lit the candles, placed a small digital recorder beneath his seat in the confessional booth. It felt wrong recording a confession, even an anonymous one, but he had to know. He had to have something real. That night, the voice returned. "Bless me, Father." The recording captured everything. Elias played it back afterward, his hands trembling. Then something strange happened. When he played the audio at home, the voice sounded different, distant, as if it were echoing from a vast space, not the small booth. Some parts were garbled, others almost whispering in reverse. He played it backward, out of curiosity. And in that reversed static, something new emerged. "Let me out." The next day, Elias returned to the church with a bucket of holy water, candles, and a worn copy of the Roman ritual. He didn't tell the bishop. He didn't tell anyone. At midnight, he sat in the booth again. This time the voice arrived angry. "You shouldn't have listened back," it hissed. "You shouldn't have heard me." Elias began to pray out loud. Latin verses filled the space. The candles flickered wildly. The voice screamed, not in pain, but in rage. The wood of the booth groaned. Something scratched from inside the walls. And then, silence. When he opened the door, the other booth was no longer empty. It was charred. The seat burned. Blackened handprints marred the walls. Since that night, the confessional has remained locked. Elias never spoke of it again. The police found no proof, no evidence. But sometimes, late in the evening, when the church is nearly empty and the wind howls outside, the red light flickers, and a whisper slips through the wood. There will be more. When David Klein returned from the mission field in Uganda, he was not the same man. He had been gone for nearly 9 months, a devoted Baptist minister spreading the gospel with a team from his church. He left full of hope, light in his eyes. But when he came back, that light was gone. His skin was pale. He jumped at sudden sounds. He didn't speak much, and when he did, his voice trembled like he was always holding something back. At first, his wife Laura thought it was trauma. The mission field was dangerous, especially in remote villages. But then he started keeping journals, dozens of them, and every night, without fail, he would repeat the same phrase before bed: "God is watching." At first, Laura thought it was just prayer, but the way he said it, it wasn't reassuring, it was a warning. Then the cameras started. David installed them in every room, even the bathroom. Small, blinking red eyes in corners and ceilings. He said it was for safety. That evil had followed him back. That something from the jungle had attached itself to him. Laura begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. He barely slept. He started fasting for days at a time, writing in his journals with frantic intensity. He filled page after page with diagrams, biblical verses, and symbols that didn't seem to belong to any known language. Then came the first incident. Laura woke one night to the sound of weeping. She found David in the living room, curled up on the floor, whispering to a small black device, one of the cameras. He kept repeating, "I see you. I see you. I know what you are." When she touched his shoulder, he screamed so loud the neighbors called the police. That night, David told her the truth. "There's a face in the footage," he whispered. "Not mine, not yours, something else." He said it first appeared in Uganda in a photo he took of a jungle church. Just a glint in the window, an outline of a figure where no one had been. But when he zoomed in, the figure had eyes like mirrors, and in them he saw himself, not how he looked, but how he would look, dead. He deleted the photo, but the image didn't go away. It followed him, appearing in reflections, dreams, even the pages of his Bible. He started filming himself constantly, hoping to catch it again, to understand it. But the more he filmed, the more it watched back. Laura checked the footage herself. Hours of David pacing, praying, muttering scripture. She was about to turn it off when something caught her eye. Just a flicker. She rewound and paused. There in a single frame, reflected in the black screen of the television. A pale figure standing directly behind David, grinning. But David was alone in the room. Laura begged him to stop. He only looked at her with hollow eyes. "You don't understand," he said. "It's not a demon. It's not Satan. It's God," she recoiled. "You mean that metaphorically?" "No." His voice was flat. "We were wrong. The real God isn't love. He doesn't forgive. He watches. Forever." He sees what we are, and he hates us. That night, David nailed shut all the windows. A week later, David disappeared. The police found the house locked from the inside, all cameras fried. The memory cards melted. Only one recording was intact, hidden in the floorboards beneath his bed. It was 10 minutes long, grainy, black and white. It showed David standing in front of the mirror, whispering to himself. He looked tired, hollow. Then he suddenly went still and whispered, "I finally understand." Behind him, a shape appeared, tall, pale. Its face was blurred, but its eyes were silver. David turned as if to greet it. The recording ended. David's journals were seized as part of the investigation. Most of the pages were gibberish. But the final line, written in shaking hands, said, "If he made us in his image, maybe he regrets it." Laura moved away and never spoke to reporters again. But sometimes when she passes mirrors, she sees something, watching, waiting, smiling. The miracle began on a quiet Sunday morning. Iglesia de la Santa Luz was a small stone church nestled in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico. It was the kind of place forgotten by time, cracked adobe walls, wooden benches, and a tiny bell tower that hadn't rung in decades. The congregation was dwindling, the priest growing old, and the children of the village had mostly moved to the cities. But that morning, during a routine mass, something strange happened. A single votive candle, one of many lit for the sick, flared brighter than the rest. The flame turned a deep blue, almost violet, and then refused to extinguish. Not when the wind blew through the open doors, not when Father Mateo tried to snuff it with a brass cap. Not even when he poured water over it. The flame persisted, flickering calmly, as though defying the world itself. Word spread quickly. The next day, more people came. By the end of the week, pilgrims were arriving from neighboring towns. They knelt before the strange blue flame, whispering prayers and making the sign of the cross. Some claimed they felt warmth in their bones. Others said their pain disappeared when they touched the air around it. By the second week, people began calling it a milagro, a divine miracle. The Vatican was contacted. Father Mateo didn't like it. He had served the church for nearly 40 years, and never had he seen something like this. The candle was not holy. It had been bought in bulk, unblessed, unremarkable. Yet now it burned endlessly. One night, long after the crowds left, Mateo stood alone before the flame. He whispered a simple prayer, then gently blew on it. It flared just for a second, and he heard something, not in the room, in his head. A voice, quiet, feminine, whispering in a language he didn't understand. He stumbled back, heart racing. It was not God's voice. That week, strange things began to happen. A woman who claimed to be healed returned the next day with bleeding eyes. A child fell into a trance after staring into the flame too long, muttering verses from Revelation in a voice not his own. A man from Guadalajara tried to steal the candle. He was found the next morning in the desert, dehydrated, blind, and mumbling. It showed me what's beneath. Mateo tried to move the candle. He couldn't lift it. The stone around it had fused, as if the wax had melted straight into the altar, anchoring it like a root. He fasted, prayed, begged for guidance. And then he dreamed. In the dream, the church was full, not of people, but of shadows. The candle burned in the center, its flame towering high, and from that blue fire, faces emerged. Not human. Pale, stretched things with wide mouths and lidless eyes. They whispered in unison, "We burn in his absence." He awoke screaming. The next day, the Vatican envoy arrived, a young, confident priest named Father Dario. He smiled politely, examined the candle, and declared it a sign of God's grace. Cameras were brought in. The story reached international news. They planned to build a new altar around the miracle. But Father Matteo wasn't convinced. He waited until midnight. Then he returned to the church alone, carrying a large steel can of gasoline. He stood before the candle, shaking, and whispered, "If you're not from God, then you'll burn in hell." He poured the gasoline. The flame didn't flicker. He lit a match. There was a sound, not a whoosh, but a scream, like wind rushing through a throat too large to belong to anything human. The fire engulfed the altar. The entire church went up in minutes. When villagers arrived at dawn, they found nothing but smoldering stone. But there, in the center of the ruin, sat the candle, still burning, still blue, untouched. Father Matteo was never seen again. The Vatican issued a quiet statement calling it a tragic fire with no divine implications. But the candle now resides in a sealed chamber beneath a new chapel. No one is allowed to touch it. No one is allowed to pray to it. And no one is allowed to be alone with it after midnight. Because sometimes, when the room is dark and quiet, you can hear whispers in the flame.